Hi, I'm Lindsay,
And I'm Connor.
and I promise this is interesting.
You actually do get to promise it this week
I do.
because it's your week
Yeah.
to present a little rabbit hole to us.
Connor, do you have any idea where I'm taking us today?
Your hint last week was cold,
Indeed, Rooney.
and I said Cold War, and you said absolutely not.
Right. So how about you guess again and make it better?
A lost Antarctic expedition.
Yes.
Wait, is it actually?
That's exactly what we're discussing today.
Oh boy.
I put together an 11-page document, and we're going to discuss it today. And I hope you're very excited.
I'm thrilled to be here.
This is one of my favorite stories of humankind ever.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Now, you've relayed some of the story to me, but I
think I
imagine
have.
not everything.
oh no, I think I know what you're talking about. I read a book last year about a different Antarctic expedition. This
okay.
is a whole other one.
Gotcha.
Okay.
All right.
So it's called Terra Nova. Ever
Terra
heard of it?
Nova. Okay.
Okay. When I was in high school, I started writing plays. It was an art school, so we could get away with that kind of thing. And just like with novels or screenplays, the best way to learn how to write one is to read a million of them.
Mm-hmm.
So my playwriting teacher, this amazing woman named Mrs. Lindsay, which was a joke that we heard a lot,
I'm sure.
would bring in classic plays and we would read them aloud and break down exactly what made them work and what we liked. And the mornings we spent doing this are some of the most formative and influential for me. And one of the plays we read that has stuck with me all this time is called Terra Nova by Ted Talley. Terra Nova, which is Latin meaning new earth, is based on a true story about 5 men who set out on an expedition to reach the South Pole by foot between the years of 1910 and 1913.
Oh my! Can I real quick?
Yeah.
This is. I just want to interject because I got to make myself feel smart. Terra Nova. What does it mean again?
New Earth.
New Earth. Okay. Do you know what astronauts say when they land after being in space?
No, ad astra.
They say terra firma.
Terra firma. I see. Okay.
So I think like back on Earth or solid Earth or something like that.
Solid ground,
Solid
maybe
ground,
something
yeah.
like that.
Anyway,
Interesting.
sorry. Keep going.
No, they were led by the legendary explorer Captain Robert Falcon Scott.
Okay.
Incredible name.
Awesome.
And our rabbit hole today is about Scott and his final ill-fated adventure to the South Pole.
Okay.
So before we dive into that story, I want to provide a little bit of context for the modern age of exploration and the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. Explorer Ranulph Fiennes. Has anyone ever heard of this man? Have you heard of Ranulph Fiennes?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
You're saying Randolph or Ranulph?
Ranulph. I'm going to show you.
You're going to show me.
That's his name.
Ranulph.
Ranulph.
Yeah. Ranulph Fiennes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So explorer Ranulph Fiennes said, quote, "Hindsight is not something which is a genuine way of judging the abilities and the conceptions of the people at that time." Which raises a deeply complex question, and it's sort of at the heart of what I want to talk about today.
Okay.
How do we relate to the past, and how are we meant to treat all of the people in it? I think it's natural for there to be some resentment there, and maybe some reverence. So this is a little bit of a tangent, but Ranulph Fiennes is pretty unanimously considered to be the greatest living explorer in the world. He's a Brit, but we won't hold that against him this one time. His character, I think, is best summarized by this little anecdote that I found.
Oh boy.
In 2000, he attempted to walk solo and unsupported to the North Pole. The expedition failed when his sleds fell through thin ice and he was forced to pull them out by hand.
Oh boy.
He sustained severe frostbite and had to call for medical assistance. He was flown back to the UK, where he was told that all mobility in 5 of his fingers was completely lost.
Oh.
They were going to have to amputate.
I think I've seen videos of this guy.
Probably.
Yeah.
They would have to be amputated. But no surgeon would perform the surgery for 5 months after the original accident, because when you get frostbite, you have to allow regrowth between the dead part of your body and the alive part of your body. Because, especially with fingers, the alive part is going to form the new shortened tips of your fingers. So you have to let it heal. But it's excruciatingly painful. Like picking up a piece of paper with frostbitten fingers is awful. So Fiennes didn't want to wait that long. He was impatient to get back to his regular scheduled programming. So he and his wife, who we can't even go down that rabbit hole because this woman was incredible, cut them off with an electric foresaw.
Man.
That's Ranulph, okay? Ranulph Fiennes, who has lived 700 lifetimes in one considers Captain Scott, leader of the Terra Nova expedition, a legendary icon in exploration. And everyone, from glaciologists to historians to fellow explorers, living and dead, agrees with that. So just knowing who Randolph Fiennes is, that's like enough for me. I don't need any more information.
Right, exactly.
But I'm here to prove
Anybody
it
he gives
today.
the gold star to, it's like, yeah, he's probably okay.
If he's impressed by something, I'm like, well, then it must be impressive. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
certainly not going to argue with you. So it's 1910. The tea bag has just been invented. John D. Rockefeller Jr. has just announced his retirement.
Right.
And we are solidly in the middle of the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. The continent, while enormous at 5.5 million square miles, is the most remote place on Earth. Even now, with the advent of radios and emails, satellite cell phones, and fax machines, while standing on its coastline, you are 600 miles away from any other land. In 1910, you've got tea bags and handwritten letters to communicate with people. You are a different kind of alone when you are on the continent. Ernest Shackleton, this name might ring a bell because I read his book last year.
Yes, you've talked about Ernest Shackleton a little
Ernest
bit.
Shackleton was an Irishman, and he was another explorer at this time. And he and his crew became stranded on the Antarctic ice for 497 days. He got
God.
himself and his crew out of there alive. Nobody died. He didn't lose anybody during this time. It's an amazing story. There's a great book by Alfred Lansing that details the journey if you are at all interested in the durability of the human spirit or seasickness.
How many fingers did they lose?
I mean, I think some fingers were lost and toes too. And they were also stranded right before the outbreak of World War I. So when they got back, a lot of them were conscripted. It's like
To survive that and then immediately get shot in World War
just
I.
4 years of like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
Like, it must have been shocking. So there's this great book by Alfred Lansing, but in it, Antarctica is described like this. Quote, "In all the world, there is no desolation more complete than the polar night. It is a return to the ice age. No warmth, no life, no movement. Only those who have experienced it can fully appreciate what it means to be without the sun day after day and week after week. Few men unaccustomed to it can fight off its effects altogether, and it has driven some men mad." End quote.
That's pretty heavy.
In 1910, it is also the last truly unexplored slice of land on the planet. So naturally, there was a series of races to see who could explore it first.
We love a good race, the human race, don't we?
Do we? I'm a little over it. People keep getting hurt. Maybe just get there when you get there.
The race for space, the race for electricity, the race for Antarctic exploration. Like, we'll make a race out of anything.
Yes. Like, how about relax?
The race to the atomic bomb.
What's that saying? Slow and steady wins the race.
Right.
Where's that? So Scott had been to Antarctica before on an expedition that lasted from 1901 to 1904. He and two other men, Shackleton, our old friend, and Edward Wilson, who will come up again in a minute, attempted to reach the South Pole with sled dogs, but were forced to turn back due to scurvy, snow blindness, and, awfully, the dogs started to die. Scott wrote about this a lot in his daily entries, and it's clear that he felt a great deal of admiration for these dogs, and watching them die was deeply painful. This was another thing that came through in the age of sled dogs, delivering mail, delivering medicine, Arctic and Antarctic exploration. Men formed bonds with these dogs. It's the same camaraderie that you feel with people that you went through the pandemic with. You know what I mean?
Sure,
There's just like an understanding of survival there.
Yeah, the same with horses, right? Like
War horses.
we watched that movie Hidalgo. I mean,
Yes.
talk about like a bond between things that just exist, right?
Yes.
Spirits,
You
truthfully.
have men who weep when their horses get shot and die in war because you've been through something. You're two living beings trying to live through something extraordinary together. It's very emotional. So that was very hard on Scott, and that's going to become relevant later.
Yeah, and I can imagine the dogs are like your lifeline, ultimately. They're the thing, they work for you, they work with you, they keep you alive, they keep you moving.
We are going to find out through this story just how important dogs were to this entire exploration.
I can't even imagine.
So the team returned, and in 1906, Scott returned to his naval duties because he was a naval officer. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the job was only half done. So he had a huge calling to get back to Antarctica, and this time he wanted to be the first man to the South Pole. That was his goal.
Okay.
So
People have not reached the South Pole yet.
No, South Pole and North Pole have not been reached yet. And we've all seen pictures of Antarctica. I would love to include some from the original expeditions going up, but it
Throw
is
'em up.
just
Yeah.
white desert. There's nothing. There's
Yeah.
no tree. There's no take a right at the bush. It's just white forever. In fact, I read something that spooked me to my boots. It's like there is so little pollution in Antarctica that visibility stretches on for about 300 miles. But you have no way to understand the scope of what you're looking at because
Right.
there's nowhere to measure it. You're not like, oh, that tree is pretty far away, but I can see it.
Right.
It's just expansive.
Man, that's horrifying.
It's truly.
That is
yeah.
a spooky to your boots. Like
Thank you.
fact, yes.
Did I just invent something? I think I did. I'm going to take credit for that.
Spook your boots.
Yeah. So, right. So in 1906, he's really feeling this like calling to get back to Antarctica and to this time really actually reach the South Pole.
Okay,
I just wanted to go on a little bit of a tangent.
please.
Apollo 13,
The space program,
combat veterans,
right?
theater kids. All of these people experience the height of what I would call human endurance.
Sure.
Adrenaline, excitement, living on a bed of eggshells, like which can be exhausting and traumatic, but also I think sometimes we can be so good at adapting to those situations that we don't know how to live in normal situations anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you hear that with like war veterans, right? That's why like guys in modern day, right? You hear people who go to Afghanistan and they come back and then they go back immediately.
Yeah, they don't like being stateside
Yeah.
because they've adapted to those conditions as stressful and as heightened as they are that now they don't know how to live without them.
Exactly, because
So-
there is something very refining about stress, right? Heightened stress environments is that
Yes.
everything else that's non-essential falls away,
Yes.
right?
And as inaccessible and remote and as treacherous as Antarctica is, imagine going there, experiencing that, and then returning to desk work.
Right.
You have to feel stifled.
Waiting
I
for
would
a
feel
bus,
stifled.
like,
yeah.
yeah.
Just like talking to your wife over spaghetti dinner.
Yeah.
I'd go crazy. I'd be staring out the window.
No, I understand why guys go exploring, go off into the far reaches of the unreachable in order to find something. It's less about actually finding the thing and more like just to be alone.
Just
right?
being out.
Yeah.
Just exploring.
Yeah, well,
It's-
you kind of see this too. It might be related, it might be unrelated. I think it's in the same vein, though. We've talked about this, where a lot of times professional sports, ultimately, the professional sport being at the top of the game means that you don't have to deal with the general public anymore, right? Surfing is the one that comes to mind for me, right? When you surf, you have to go to the public spots, and there's everybody everywhere all the time, right? If you get into professional surfing, you suddenly don't have to deal with the crowds anymore.
True.
Right?
True.
Or if you do big wave surfing, you don't have to deal with all the crowds anymore. You have to go out into the middle of the ocean and find these massive swells that are as tall as a skyscraper, or as tall as like a 6-story building. Shouldn't say size. That'd be a fucking insane wave.
Connor surfs, by the way.
Yeah, not this crazy though.
Connor waved the first time he went surfing.
Yeah.
How many people?
I did do that, but I don't want to. Anyway,
This man's infuriating. He's good at everything.
I'm not good at everything.
Upsetting.
I like surfing, but there's an HBO series called The 100-Foot Wave, and it follows this guy who is a big wave surfer, and that's his whole thing is that he's the only one on the ocean, because who else would be insane enough to catch a wave this big? It's isolation, it's separation from the world around you.
And it's ultimate focus.
It
like
is.
that's the reason I'm drawn to the hobbies and the things that I'm drawn to is
Yeah.
anything that requires complete and utter focus and allows me to put blinders on to everything else
Yeah.
is very thrilling to me. Like that gives me a lot of energy.
Yeah,
And you have to think like in Antarctica, you're not wandering through Antarctica just thinking about your wife and cherry pie. Like
Right.
you have to watch out for crevasses. You have to look out for poor weather. You're looking out for a tree or a bush that you might need to bring back with you for scientific research purposes. You're looking for fossils. Like you're keeping an eye on your dogs. You're keeping an eye on your sled. You're keeping an eye on the captain to make sure that you can see him.
right. Making sure that the wind is not blowing up your like jackets.
Right.
and,
Like
yeah.
there's no time to think about anything besides exactly what you are doing right now. So exacerbating this growing sense of FOMO that Scott is feeling, other men are continuing to explore the icy regions of the earth. Most notably, Roald Amundsen, a Norwegian explorer who was setting off on a journey to reach the North Pole and claim it for Norway.
Oh, interesting.
The Amundsen Sea in Antarctica is named after him. So that should hint at some of the success and notoriety that was to come. But he was a sort of nemesis for Scott because Amundsen was very fast. He was a very fast,
interesting.
swift, and well-organized traveler. He's going to come around again in a minute.
I feel like this is a small circle of men.
It's a very small circle of men. They all know each other and they keep up with each other and they write each other letters.
How sweet.
And some of them hate each other.
Right.
And
There's
but
rivalries.
they all talk to each other. Like Amundsen and Scott sent letters back and forth to each other. They stayed in touch with each other. And same thing with Shackleton. Like all these guys are connected. So sounds like a good cookout. So let's talk about the crew that Scott started putting together for the Terra Nova expedition. He started putting together another expedition. This time he was determined to reach the South Pole and plant the Union Jack into its icy face. That was the goal of the Terra Nova expedition.
Now, let me just interrupt you.
Yeah.
What is the claim on this stuff? Do countries actually believe, or explorers actually believe, if I get there first, then it's England's? Or are they just saying, like, we're planting our flag because the English were here first? It's
That's
still
it.
Antarctica. Like,
That's just it. It's Antarctica, but the English were the first to come here. It's pure nationalism and ego. I will say, Amundsen was doing that for Norway, and Amundsen was very focused on getting there first. That was his key point. Scott wanted to get there first for England, don't get me wrong, but he had a lot of scientific investment in it as well.
He's supposed to report back on his findings.
Right. He's like, I'm going to get there first, and I'm going to bring back fossils and animals and pictures and information, and we are going to evolve quickly because of me. So his plan was a little bit more all-encompassing.
I'm guessing a common trait amongst all these men is a pretty large ego.
Yes, sirree, Bob. Yes, sirree, Bob. So joining him on the adventure was his old friend, Edward Wilson, who I think you would have gotten along with very well
Why do you
in
think
another
that?
life. He was a zoologist and a painter. His watercolor renderings of Antarctica were hugely helpful in mapping the continent.
Really?
Yeah. He seems to me to be the soul of the group. He's like considered the beating heart of the final expedition.
He's the artist.
He had an unshakable calm, a gentle nature, and a much respected sense of steadiness. Everybody really liked Edward Wilson.
Okay.
So
We're big fans of Edward Wilson.
yeah. There was also Petty Officer Edgar Evans, who was described by Scott's biographer as, quote, a huge, bull-necked, beefy figure, a beery womanizer who was running a bit too fat by the time of the expedition. He was almost left behind in New Zealand when he drunkenly fell into the water while boarding the ship.
Oh my God.
But he was held in very high regard by Scott for his resourcefulness, his strength, and his fund of anecdotes. So Scott decided to overlook the incident.
His personality higher. Yeah. He's somebody to keep around in the locker room for halftime.
It is important to note, he was also like the muscle of this.
Yes.
This guy was a Welshman. He had broad shoulders. He was strong.
Yeah.
He was the biggest guy in the group.
He's got that
bar
farmer
none.
strength.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He would have loved the carnivore diet and Zebulon for sure. There was also my favorite man on this trip, Henry Robertson Birdie Bowers, the relentless optimist. He was the smallest of the group, and he had a very particularly shaped nose, and that's why they called him Birdie. He was the most beloved member of this expedition. Everybody loved Birdie. This comes through in the photos we have of him. He was a Scotsman through and through, always the first to volunteer for the unpleasant tasks. And even when the expedition started to sour, he never lost his belief that they would make it out. He had a full, unwavering loyalty to Scott and really believed that he was a brilliant leader.
Sure.
He's going to get us out of here and everything's going to be fine.
He's a good
and
lieutenant.
also, we're going to get there first. We're going to win.
Really? Yeah.
Did not matter how bad it got.
So he's a good second man. He's a good lieutenant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you should see, he's the only one who's smiling in all the photos.
Right.
Everybody else is like having misery. And he's like, we're in the snow.
Yeah. That's probably who I would have gotten along with most.
think so,
You know me. I'm an endless optimist about things.
Yeah.
Annoyingly so.
I think you're Wilson and I'm not Birdie. But and then there was Lawrence Edward Grace Titus Oates. We're going to call him Oates because that's what everybody calls him.
Okay.
He was a true British gentleman. He was a member of the aristocracy. He was possibly the most British amongst them. He fought in the Boer War where he was injured. His leg was injured.
Okay.
And this made his struggle in Antarctica all the more grueling because that wound never fully healed. It left him with a limp. He was said to be very stoic, reserved, a bit removed. He was not a fan of Scott's leadership, but when push came to shove, he was a very, very loyal member of the camp, always looking out for his fellow men, and was ultimately incredibly generous. So those are the 5 men that we're going to be talking about today.
Gotcha.
There were many other men involved in this expedition, men who were helping on the ship, men who were doctors, other scientists who were just going to stay at base camp and collect things and, and conduct experiments and take, photos or paintings and renderings of the landscape. Also men who were going to deliver and carry food stores. But the final push to the South Pole was done by those 5 men.
Yeah, because that's the thing, right? You don't just land at the edge of Antarctica on the shore, pack up the gear and go, all right, we're going. Like
you have to have reinforcements.
That's the thing. You probably bring the ship. You probably, like you said, set up a camp. There's probably multiple tents and probably temporary housing. Like you bring wood to build cabins, right?
Yes.
Like
so you set up base camp, and you also have to set up depots. And these men help you set up the depots and store them and ensure that they stay.
Interesting. So you probably do an expedition, set up a depot, come back, replenish, go out, set up another depot further along, come back, replenish. And it's all in preparation for the one big trip.
Yeah. And those groups get smaller and smaller as you keep going.
Exactly.
Because you don't want to take 75 men to the South Pole.
No.
You can't do it. So you take 5. So I don't want to leave any of those men out, but we only know those 5 names.
Well, history is built by the unremembered.
Well, that's a really depressing way to put it, but yeah. So let's talk about the journey. Now, Scott's mentor urged him, once again, bring dogs. You cannot travel at this time without dogs. Scott had so much trepidation around bringing the dogs at all because of the negative experiences he had during the first expedition.
Oh, boy.
To accompany the dogs, then, he decided to bring ponies as well to help carry the load.
Could you imagine?
This would turn out to be the first of several grave mistakes.
Oh, I can't.
Horse lovers, I need you to prepare your butts. Things are going to get...
Just imagine what that ship smelled like.
You know what? I won't. Now, in October 1910, the Terra Nova expedition was just about to begin. Scott was finalizing some financing meetings.
Okay.
Is that what we would call them?
Sure.
But his crew is on the ship and they're kind of gathering things and preparing for the final transport to Antarctica.
Okay.
They're on the ship, but they're still scrounging for money. Scott receives some stomach-dropping news at this point. Amundsen, who was attempting to become the first man to reach the North Pole, had changed his plans. Another explorer, an American named Robert Peary, lied and said that he'd already reached and therefore claimed the North Pole for the United States.
But they didn't know that he lied about it.
They didn't know that he lied about it.
Okay.
So Amundsen said, if I'm not going to be the first to the North Pole, I'll be the first to the South Pole.
Oh, gosh.
Now, Scott's Terra Nova expedition was very public knowledge. Scott was a very public figure. He was famous. He talks about coming back from the Discovery expedition, which was the one that he did 1901 to 1904. And for 2 years, from 1904 when he got back to 1906, he was like, I'm going to every university and speaking. People are following me around. They're asking for autographs and information, and it's exhausting.
Yeah,
I hate this. So he was a very public figure. So when he said he's going back and this time he's going to land at the South Pole and plant the Union Jack, everybody believed him. Not to mention he's a naval officer, so everybody considers him like a war hero.
Right, so all these guys probably have military experience.
Many of them do. That's how Scott came to meet a lot of these men that were in his expedition, is they're all naval soldiers.
Could you imagine being whisked away after being in the military, being in the Navy for years and years, and then a guy goes, hey, you want to do like some exploring with me?
That's exactly what happened to Scott.
Really?
He was just found by this other guy named Markham, who I think was a businessman, and he thought Scott had a lot of promise and showed a lot of leadership. And he was like, look, I'm trying to get England to the South Pole first. Are you interested? And Scott was like, yes, I'm also crazy. That sounds like a brilliant idea.
Yeah, because they're not doing it for the money, I imagine.
No, there's no money in this. Are you kidding me? All the money goes to meat and plum pudding. So Amundsen knew that Scott had already planned the Terra Nova expedition. So as a courtesy, he sent him a telegram, and it said, Beg to inform you, Fram proceeding Antarctic, Amundsen. Fram was the name of his ship. So he's saying, I'm heading south.
Oh, man. Okay.
So Scott was now in a race to reach the South Pole.
Which, yeah, why wouldn't we take our time? Why not just go full force and go as fast as possible?
I don't exactly. That's what I'm thinking. I'm
Yeah.
like, go faster. How about just take a car? How about just take a skidoo? Okay. So a month later, in November of 1910, Scott and his crew finally set sail for Antarctica. This journey on the sea was fraught with tumult. They hit storm after storm. Oates, who was in charge of the ponies, worked around the clock to ensure that they were kept warm, fed, and that they weren't breaking their legs by getting bashed around in the ship's stalls.
Yeah.
And those storms never stopped coming. The entire Terra Nova expedition was plagued by storms. They had awful luck in this regard. So this was an omen of what was to come.
Yeah.
At one point, the ship nearly capsized, but somehow in January of 1911, the crew made landfall on Ross Island, where they set up a base camp. Then they continued sailing east into the Bay of Whales, where they saw Amundsen's ship was already docked.
Oh, no.
And the Norwegians were off, and they were setting up their base camp. There was a feeling amongst Scott's crew that beating the Norwegians was going to be just next to impossible because they had way more experience in frigid desert-like conditions.
They were raised in it. Yeah.
They were raised in it. They're familiar with glaciers and the nature of glaciers, and they had way more experience with sled dogs.
Mm-hmm.
They were expert dog breeders.
And I'm going to guess that they didn't bring ponies.
They did not bring ponies.
Yeah.
So, but they are still technically neck and neck at this point.
Right.
Now, it's February 1911 by this point, and the Antarctic winter lasts from March to October. So Scott and his crew had to tough it out at base camp for a long Antarctic winter until November of that year.
Oh my God.
So, and they literally started their expedition on November 1st. So Scott knew that the winter lasted through October. So on November 1st, he was like, even if it's still cold, we are going out.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so they actually were a lot closer to Amundsen's thing than they expected because they landed, you said, in February or January.
January, yeah.
So they've still got to outlast that until November before they can actually start the expedition.
Yeah, the Norwegians had to wait too.
Exactly.
Like they're not going to, you can't
Right.
through an Antarctic winter start trudging by foot.
Interesting. Okay, so they actually were basically neck and neck as soon as they landed.
Yeah,
there.
they were.
Yeah.
They were.
They had months to look over at each other and just, yeah.
Yes. There was a real feeling of like, as soon as this
Right.
as soon as this winter's over. And on November 1st, they started. So then they could start the foot, dog, and pony walk to the pole.
Okay.
The plan was to make the long, grueling march across the Great Ice Barrier, which sounds nice and cozy, up the Beardmore Glacier, and onto the Antarctic Plateau to reach the pole. But it wasn't just a flag-planting mission for Scott, which really that would have been impressive enough. Scott was determined to conduct scientific research, possibly encouraged by his very close friendship with Wilson, who was the lead scientist on this mission.
Mm-hmm.
So his insistence on collecting geological samples and studying the icy wilderness was a noble pursuit, but it's also one that slowed them down a great deal.
I can imagine. Well, and it's probably hard to find information on this. I would probably guess that a lot of the funding is coming from governmental resources. And, the governments of countries have an interest in that as well, right? Of scientific research.
Right. And if you find a rare animal in Antarctica and you bring that back for study, that looks great for England.
Right.
It's like we sent our men to Antarctica and they brought back this endangered penguin that tells us so much about human evolution.
Right, exactly.
That's all ego boosting. That's more money. That's more political power. It's all connected in this big, stupid urinal of a situation. So this was in direct contrast with Amundsen, who produced virtually no maps, brought back no significant scientific data. He wrote down just enough information to get to the pole and back, not a sentence more.
See,
and that's the character difference between these two men.
That's a pretty big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's how Scott organized this march into the Great White Desert. He split all of the men into two groups, the advance and the main party. So the advance party marched 15 miles ahead to mark the route, which made it easier, really made it possible for the main party to haul all of their supplies, the ponies and the dogs. every 65 miles, the team would set up depots for the journey back, where they'd store food, extra socks, probably a little love note, something, a little romance, something. Now, summertime in Antarctica does not bring loads of sunshine and fields of wheat and apple pie with dollops of cream on top.
No, it's still cold.
It's still a wintry wasteland,
Yeah.
and weather during this leg of the trip was also extremely poor. They were stuck several times by awful winter storms, which nowadays we can see coming via satellite imaging days in advance. But at this time, the only way you could tell if a storm was on its way is if you could see the clouds coming towards you. So you're just totally
And there's no shelter out there.
exposed.
Yeah.
No, there's nothing for you. You could set up your tent and just wait for the blizzard to go.
Right.
That's it. So Scott has been greatly criticized for his use or not use of dogs, ponies, and machines because he was acting under the belief that human power was more effective. Ranulph Fiennes, our old friend, is here to put an ice axe right into that criticism. He says, quote, "It wasn't until 1993 that we finally proved that Scott was correct, because we managed to cross the entire continent, not just halfway to the pole, using nothing, no outside help whatsoever, hauling all of our own equipment on our backs. Many American and Soviet expeditions have tried to cross the whole continent using either dogs or machines, but neither the dog nor the machine have proved sufficiently fuel efficient to be able to do so without resupply at some point."
Interesting.
There was a great basis of correctness in Scott's thoughts.
So what you're saying is like using dogs was criticized at the time, or not using dogs was criticized at the time,
Right.
but ultimately using just manpower was the correct decision.
No, it wasn't. You could argue if it was the correct decision or the incorrect decision. Manpower is the most efficient way to cross the Antarctic continent.
Interesting.
Dogs, ponies, machines, they all have to be resupplied, re-upped, replaced.
Right.
Men have been proven they're able to carry everything on their back and carry their sleds by themselves across the entire continent.
Interesting.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
There's some argument whether he did the right thing or not, but it's a good argument. So anyway, we have to talk about the ponies. So they were hopelessly ill-equipped for this terrain from the beginning. Their hooves were sliding all over the ice. They had no grip whatsoever. They were struggling through snow drifts that went up to their bellies, and they were already early on completely spent because they were carrying really heavy loads. So in an act of mercy, Scott ordered that they all be shot. And Oates, the cavalryman, carried this out. So
I mean, and I'm sure Oates probably volunteered to do it just because of his connection with the ponies and everything. But he like saw them all the way down there. You know
he
what
was
I mean?
responsible for the horses. That
Right.
was his main job.
Right.
Was he's the cavalryman. He's going to take care of the horses. So it was his responsibility to shoot them.
I mean, it does sound like a mercy at that point.
It was.
Yeah.
These horses were
Tough. That's a tough environment for them.
It's pretty rough.
Yeah.
So now they lost pony support miles away from their objective. So all of that weight that the ponies had been carrying now had to be carried by the men. And the weather would not improve until late December. So Scott and his team made very little progress during this time. Finally, the oministic weather lifted, and it was time to decide who would make the final summit to the pole. Scott, obviously, Wilson, his adorable friend who was drawing pictures, Evans, the henchman, because he was going to help carry things, Birdie, the town favorite, and Oates, the soldier who just shot all the horses. I feel like if you just had to shoot all the horses, you're a shoo-in.
You're at least like, you get an extra ticket. Yeah.
You're getting the photo at the South Pole. For sure. On Christmas Day, the men celebrated with horse meat and plum pudding.
A little morbid, but that's okay.
Listen,
You got to
do what you got to do. You can't throw away all that good meat. Okay.
Yeah.
By New Year's Eve, they had only 170 miles to go, and spirits were extremely high.
170 miles is still a long way.
Walking
Yeah.
on a glacier?
Do you have the stats? Like how many miles did they make a day just walking?
So it depends. So when the weather was bad, they could only make between 4 and 6 a day.
Oh my.
But if it was good, I think they could make up to 20 miles a day.
Because it's just flat, right? Like there's no elevation change,
Yes.
really.
And when you have the support of dogs, that helps tremendously
Now,
because you're moving much faster.
Talk me through the dog thing. Do they, is it like a traditional Alaskan sled dog setup? Like do they have 10 dogs in a line pulling a sled?
Yes, I think they had 7 dogs in a line. You had 6 straight up, and then you had the lead dog.
Right.
And they're helping you pull your equipment, your sledge. They call it your sledge, which is just your tent, your tea, your food, your stuffs, everything.
And it's on skis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in this final descent to the South Pole, I don't believe they brought dogs with them.
Really?
They split off from the final group. So the group kept dripping. Like you're setting up a depot and they're going back to base. Setting up a depot. Some people go back to base. So before...
Well, I imagine some of them are waiting around at the depot for the return trip as well.
They're not waiting at the depot.
No, they're not.
No,
Okay.
they're going back to base. And the plan is to like go to the depot and like meet them with fresh dogs and fresh food.
I see.
At some point.
Right.
But
Well, because if you went all the way there with help, coming all the way back by yourself would be like extremely hard.
yeah.
Right.
So they're setting up these depots so that you have access to more food, maybe more oil, so you can light fires and keep your lights on. But for the most part, everybody went back to base camp because that's the safest place to be.
Gotcha. Man, that's a lonely walk on the way back.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So they're on their own at this point, just the 5. So Scott's diary entry on January 17th, 1912 tells exactly how they came to reach the South Pole. They
boy.
made it to the South Pole.
So they did make it.
They did.
Okay.
This is what he says, quote, "About the second hour of the march, Bertie's sharp eyes detected what he thought was a cairn. He was uneasy about it, but argued that it must be a sastrugi. A sastrugi is a wind-sculpted wave of snow that kind of plays tricks on your eyes because it looks like shadows and snow. They can start to look like structures to you. So he was like, I must be seeing something. We marched on and found that it was a black flag attached to a sledge carry. Nearby was the remains of a camp. This told the whole story. The Norwegians have forestalled us and are the first to the pole."
Wow.
13 years of planning, organizing, financing, and racing through the cold had ended in defeat. The Norwegians had arrived only 1 month earlier.
Wow.
They beat them by about 30 days.
30 days.
Yeah.
Damn.
Amundsen's journey was well-fortuned from the beginning. They had really good weather, plenty of food. Their dogs were well-bred and even gained weight on the trek, which is unheard of. I don't know how they did that. And when all was said and done, the march only took 99 days.
And how long did theirs take? Did Scott's take?
I actually don't know, but months. I mean, this
yeah.
took forever. So there's a photo of Scott and his 4 compatriots at the South Pole. We'll have to throw it up. It is the most miserable photo ever taken.
They're just distraught.
These men are, they have frostbite on their face, all of them. They have it on their feet, on their hands. They're in a great deal of pain. They're hungry. And they didn't make it in time.
Right.
Like their main objective was to get there first, and they didn't do it. So they look stricken.
I can imagine. Yeah, I imagine it's an even more extreme version of like when people start hiking the Appalachian Trail.
Oh, God.
And then they take a picture of themselves at the end of hiking the Appalachian Trail.
Yes.
It's just like beards down to their nipples and they're skinny and like wiry.
Yeah.
You know?
And kind of crazy looking. Like at the beginning, they're just like, oh, mom's
Because they've
going
been
on a
eating
trip.
oats and granola bars
Yeah,
for
and
6
9
months.
months later, they're like little wood things.
Exactly.
Yeah. So now Scott, Wilson, Evans, Bertie, and Oates faced the dreadful prospect of trudging 800 miles back to base camp.
And to inform everybody, we lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And things descended very quickly.
Oh, gosh. How can it get worse?
So right before they reached the South Pole, Evans, the very strong Welshman, he had cut his hand in an accident just days before, and it never healed properly.
Okay.
Then, while the men were crossing the Beardmore Glacier on their way back, he fell into a crevasse and suffered a head injury.
Oh, no.
So here's what they used to do. This is insane. I cannot imagine this happening to me. I would pee my pants forever. So crevasses, I think we've all seen pictures of those crevasses. They're very sharp, deep drops
I've
in
watched Bear
between
Grylls,
glaciers.
yeah.
Yes. So they're hidden by a thin layer of snow. Even now, with all of today's technology, there is no way to detect where they are.
Right.
You have no idea that they're there.
They still kill people today.
They do.
Yeah.
That's like a huge reason that people die on Mount Everest is they step into what they think is solid ground and it's a crevasse and they fall.
Right. And
So-
it's just an icy kind of like channel.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
And the only protection that they had at this time was you are tied via rope to your sledge. Okay.
Okay.
And the hope was that the crevasse was skinny enough that you would fall in, but your sledge, which was really heavy, would like kind of cross over it and serve as a bridge and like save you from falling all the way down.
Oh my.
But
Okay.
then the other men would have to pull you up, and that could be very laborious and very dangerous. You could lose supplies.
Well, and not to
It's a
mention,
nightmare.
if you fell and it was tied around your waist, like that could still cause injury.
It can, yeah. And in Evan's case, you can still hit your head
Right.
on a glacier, which you're in the middle of Antarctica. You're 800 miles away from base camp. There's nothing you can do.
No.
So that's what happened to him. He fell into a crevasse and he hit his head. And the men at first didn't realize how severe the injury was, but very soon Evans became delirious. It's very likely that he had a traumatic brain injury.
Just kind of like internal bleeding or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he had a TBI on top of dehydration, starvation, exhaustion, and frostbite, severe frostbite. It meant it took Herculean effort to continue marching through the snow and ice. I don't know how he did it for as long as he did. And that's another thing, frostbite. He was suffering from severe frostbite on his hands and nose, and his fingers eventually completely froze and turned black.
Ugh.
And he couldn't use them anymore, which made it nearly impossible for him to help with the sled pulling. And he was doing most of the sled pulling because he was the strongest and the biggest of the group. So not long after this, he started hallucinating. And it became very clear to Scott and the other men that they were going to lose him.
Yeah. There's got to be signs of that, right? These guys who have done these kinds of expeditions before have seen every possible scenario of like what guys go through, you know? So it's at a certain point, like if you're the leader of that expedition, you go, we've seen too many signs. He's a goner.
Well, also, I think in someone like Oates, like Scott, who have military experience, you're looking at your situation. You're like, we have such limited supplies already.
Right.
Even if we get back to base camp tomorrow, which we won't, but
Right.
even if we could teleport there, there's nothing that the doctor can do for you.
Right. And we still have to get on the ship and sail back to New Zealand.
Yes.
Like,
And it's 1912 at this point, I think. So what are we going to do for you? Even if we were in London,
right.
you're just going to squirt mustard into your eyes and
they're
hope for the
treating
best?
TBIs with cocaine. Like,
Yes. Like, well, we can't do anything. So on the 17th of February, exactly 1 month after they'd reached the South Pole, the group made camp near Mount Hooper.
Okay.
And Evans, who's now completely delirious, refused to eat anything. The next morning, he slipped into a coma, and he died a couple of hours later, lying in his sleeping bag. Scott and the others buried him in the snow and erected a makeshift cairn of ice and rocks over his body. There was some argument over whether or not they should leave him or if they should tie him to the sledge and bring him back. But they figured we can't take on that extra weight.
No.
This guy's huge. He's like 250 pounds of sheer muscle.
That's every pound counts.
Yeah.
Like I've been in hiking situations, backpacking for like some overnight trips where you reach the top of a mountain, you've been hiking for 6 hours. And at least for me, I remember this one specific hike. I was like, I'm not going to be able to, I need to start thinking about what I can toss away right now. Cause like, I can't take this weight anymore.
No.
And that was only a day. I can't imagine the months they've been traveling with all this weight.
Yeah.
You
Through
know?
blizzards.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I think there was some discussion that, okay, we'll leave him here and we'll mark it and we might be able to come back and get him.
And I think they all knew that that wasn't going to happen.
So, well, I think Birdie probably thought it was going to happen. Evan's body has never been recovered.
Yeah.
His ice cairn vanished beneath the shifting snows, consumed by the relentless Antarctic winds. And today he lies somewhere near Mount Hooper, his body likely encased in the ice, slowly drifting with the glacier.
Yeah.
Which
That makes
there's
sense.
something oddly poetic about
There
that
is something
to me.
poetic about that.
Yeah.
He spent his life doing it, right?
Yeah.
Like,
The next day, they reached a depot near where the ponies had been slaughtered
okay.
and where they had their first whole meal in a month. Horse meat. Frozen horse meat.
They left some horse meat at the depot.
Yeah. Another issue that was becoming prevalent was their lack of oil. Temperatures were around negative 40 degrees Celsius. That's the same thing in Fahrenheit. That's where those two
They kind of meet.
units of measure intersect.
Yeah.
That's how freaking cold it is. And they were being battered by blizzard winds. So they had flown through their ice. So they'd flown through their oil stores, not their ice stores. They had plenty of ice.
They had plenty of ice,
to use
yeah.
it, but they were running out of oil. So Okay, this is something that's like a little bit of a tangent, but I thought it was really interesting. Something a glaciologist said that speaks to how impossible these odds were. All of their clothes were made of natural fibers, meaning when you sweat, the moisture leaks onto the clothes and freezes. So it actually makes you colder.
Right.
Now we
Right.
know that you have to wear synthetic fibers, so nothing, it all whisks away.
Right. You've got synthetic
Moisture whisking.
a layer on you that whisks away the moisture. Then you got an air layer between your next big puffy layer.
Yes.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a
We
whole
know that
science.
now,
Yeah.
but they didn't know that at the time. They were just trying to stay warm, but all of that was freezing them from the inside.
Yeah.
Is
Well, and again,
shocking.
not to mention Bear Grylls twice in one episode.
How
but,
dare you? Yeah.
But Bear Grylls talks about that, where he's like, the worst thing you can do is work up a sweat in Arctic conditions.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's probably what was killing them because they're working so hard
Right.
and they're dying. I mean, they're just sweating off any of their moisture.
Ugh, man.
So now other members of their team were meant to meet them at this depot and refuel, recharge, and bring dogs. That surely would have saved them, but bad weather had kept the relief efforts from reaching them. So Scott and his remaining men were truly on their own. Oates was also suffering greatly by this point. The freezing temperatures caused his old war wound to stiffen, which made every step excruciating. And his feet became badly frostbitten, blackening and swelling inside of his boots. And it got to the point where he was falling farther and farther behind the other men.
Well, you got to think, again, talking about the kind of science that we know now about clothing. The boots they had probably weren't, like, the best they could do is like sew squirrel fur into the lining or something, right?
In the Vietnam War, boots, we still couldn't figure out how to get footwear on our men. Like
Right.
the jungle foot became a thing. It was the number one thing was just trying to keep your feet dry.
Yeah.
And it was impossible to do because none of the boots were built for that. So 1912, basically you're wearing cloth shoes.
Yeah.
Like useless. After several weeks, his feet became gangrenous and he could barely stand altogether. He insisted that the other men leave and save themselves, but they outright refused to do that.
Of course they did.
So I think I might cry.
Oh boy.
I
Take a
think
second.
I am going to cry.
Take a second. You're okay. You're okay.
This part of the story really makes me tear up. So on March 16th, 1912, 2 months after they reached the South Pole and 1 month after Evans died, the team was trapped in their tent by another blizzard. And Oates raised himself up in agony and said, "I'm just going outside and maybe some time." And he limped out of the tent and never returned. And his body was never found.
Is that suspected to be like you guys aren't going to leave me behind, so I'm going to
Yeah.
do you all a favor and leave?
He sacrificed himself.
Yeah.
And that's what it ultimately says on the inscription. They put up a plaque that honored the men who died during this expedition. And they honored that he sacrificed himself in the hope that he would save his fellow men. Because that's what he did. Oh,
What
God.
a man.
By this point, all hope of completing the journey to base was lost.
Really?
The remaining 3 men were out of oil, they were frostbitten, and had only 2 days of food left. And they continued trudging onward despite this, but the weather never let up.
So the storm is just following them around.
They could not get away from the blizzard. You got to think it's negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and these winds are just whipping through. I mean, you
Right.
can't see in front of your own nose. It's like
Yeah, it's minus 40 with a minus 40 wind
impossible.
chill.
You're basically on Pluto,
Yeah.
you know? Scott's last journal entry is dated March 29th, 1912.
Okay.
Since the 21st, we have had a continuous gale from the southwest. We had fuel to make 2 cups of tea apiece and bear food for 2 days on the 20th. Every day we have been ready to start for our depot 11 miles away, but outside the door of the tent, it remains a scene of whirling drift. I do not think we can hope for any better things now. We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more. R. Scott. For God's sake, look after our people. And that was his last journal entry. Their bodies were found 8 months later, only 11 miles away from the next supply depot. The surviving members of the party erected a simple cross made out of skis at Observation Hill near base camp, and the inscription reads, "To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield.
That's a good inscription.
I know. So Terra Nova was a very successful failure, and here's why. For many years, the image of Scott as a tragic hero, beyond reproach, remained almost unchallenged. There were rifts among some of those who were close to the expedition, including some of the family members of those who ended up dying, but that disharmony was never made public. Scott was a hero, like through and through. There was no real change in public perceptions until the 1970s, by which time nearly all those directly concerned with the expedition were dead.
Yeah.
So that's when it started. Then Scott received a lot of criticism for failing to reach the South Pole first, for being overly authoritarian, and for failing to complete the journey successfully.
That's a really easy thing to judge when you're not
is.
the one walking 800 miles on foot.
Especially considering the 12 scientists who participated, the largest Antarctic scientific team of its time, made important discoveries in zoology, botany, geology, glaciology, and meteorology. The Terra Nova returned to England with over 2,100 plants, animals, and fossils, over 400 of which were new to science. Discoveries of fossil plants also found in Australia, New Zealand, Africa, and India supported the idea that the climate of Antarctica was at some point warm enough to support trees. And that means that Antarctica was once united with the other land masses.
Interesting.
So the I'll never be able to say this word. The meteorological data collected was the longest unbroken weather record in the early 20th century, providing baselines for current assessments of climate change. In 1920, former Terra Nova geographer Frank Debenham and geologist Raymond Priestley founded the Scott Polar Research Institute at the University of Cambridge, which houses a major library of polar research. Despite this, criticism for Scott's leadership surrounds his legacy now. And I want to tie this back to something that Connor and I have been talking about a lot recently, because I recently watched Apocalypto, so it's top of mind. Ancient peoples. This is going to sound totally unrelated. I swear to God, I have a point.
I'm curious to see how you go through this little rabbit hole. Yeah.
Sumer is known as the first known civilization, and it originated in Mesopotamia, which is now Iraq.
Okay.
The timeline of existence is from 5000 BC to 1750 BC.
And you're talking about Sumerians and Sumerians.
Sumerians, yes. Yeah. They are called the first because they wrote stuff down, and some of it somehow survived long enough to reach us. One of these written pieces was making the rounds on the internet about 3 years ago. It's a joke, one of the first jokes in written history.
Okay.
And this is how it goes. A dog entered a tavern and said, "I can't see a thing. I'll open this one." There's some speculation as to what the joke is. One Sumerologist surmises, quote, "The problem with jokes is really they are so culture specific.
Yeah.
Maybe this joke makes fun of a local politician, or it's a very crude word that is not otherwise attested in our sources. Bottom line, we just don't get the joke."
Yeah.
I bring this up because we will never truly know. American people 100 years ago did and said things that make very little sense to me, like ban alcohol or get involved with Ponzi schemes. And understand why anyone does anything, you have to look at their history and the people around them, and at the history of the people around them. And then to understand those people, you have to go back into their history. And at some point, you hit Iraq 10,000 years ago, and you have to admit that you will never truly know anything. You just had to be there.
Yeah.
So I have a really hard time criticizing Scott. I think it's very easy for me to giggle at the idea of him bringing ponies to Antarctica. But that's coming from me, who's making a podcast right now.
Right, exactly. Sitting in your apartment.
Yeah, and also, why wouldn't that be a good idea? We have traveled on horseback for thousands of years.
I mean, that absolutely. We used to think that diseases came from bad smells.
Yeah.
And that if you just made the bad smells go away, you wouldn't get sick.
Yeah.
Those people weren't stupid for thinking that.
No. I mean, they weren't wrong.
They were on the right track.
If something smells bad, it might be rotten.
Right.
And the bacteria in there is what makes it bad.
And here's my thing. These guys didn't do anything half-assed. Especially this expedition.
Not a thing.
They did everything in their mind that was the best decision possible for success.
Yeah. Here's the thing is rocket scientists talk about this all the time. They're like, you can prep as much as you can. Do everything in your power to your knowledge that is going to guarantee success. But we're talking about space.
Yeah.
We've been there like 5 times. We don't know. Things go wrong. The only way for us to get better is to try.
Yeah.
So all we can do is keep trying. And I think that's what they did.
I think so too.
So
There's, like Mike Tyson says, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth.
Has he actually said that?
Oh, yeah.
That's a really good quote, actually. It's very true. Have you ever been hit in the face?
It goes out the window.
It changes you a little bit. You're like, you know what? I'm not even mad anymore.
I'm going to go in, I'm going to step, I'm going to hook, and then you get punched in the chin and you go,
I want to go home. I want to go home and take a nap.
But I think you're right. Like, you can theorize as much as you want. They were the men on the moon.
What do you want from them?
And to that point, we even recognize that today. Like NASA, when we send astronauts up, NASA has authority. Sure, they're in charge of everybody. They're paying everybody's payroll. Mm-hmm. But NASA recognizes you guys make the decisions. You're actually up there. You get the final say.
Yeah.
We don't get the final say.
Right. Well, it's also like, it's very touching to me that they refused to leave Oates behind because that might have saved their lives, actually. That could have saved the other 3 because they were only 11 miles from the next depot. And that's 1-day travel, 2-day travel. Mm-hmm. They might have been able to beat a blizzard. The timing might have been corrected, but they just refused to do that.
Yeah.
Like, we're not leaving you in Antarctica.
Well, it goes, I think it's a really interesting parallel to the Norwegian man that you talked about. Amundsen. It's the difference between purpose and execution, right?
Yeah.
Amundsen had an idea going out, a purpose. It was just to get there. It was all self-motivated. And it sounds like these guys, they had kind of an execution that they were trying to do. Their whole point was like, it's not about getting there first and being the big famous men. It's about being there together and like getting through as a team. It's a team effort.
Yeah.
Right?
Especially coming back after they had already been defeated. They're like, we're not abandoning the purpose now.
No.
Like we're going to hold through to the end. I mean, you hear it in his final journal entry.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not looking good, but we're going to keep trying.
Right.
So we can end this on a somewhat bright note.
Okay, please.
In 2016, a watercolor painting of a dead bird was found in one of Antarctica's oldest buildings. These huts that the Norwegians built in 1899 and have been used by explorers and researchers alike since the early 20th century. The picture was found in a pile of papers covered in mold and penguin poop. And it's of a tree creeper, which is a little brown bird found only in the northern hemisphere, mostly in Europe. It's one of Wilson's watercolor paintings.
Really?
It's believed he created it while he was recovering from tuberculosis in Europe before the Terra Nova expedition. Mm-hmm. And it traveled with him all the way to Antarctica and has been sitting there all this time.
But they found it in a Norwegian cabin?
In one of the huts that they were using as base camp.
Yeah.
But the bird will never make its flight back north because all artifacts must be returned to the site following conservation. In accordance with the site's status as an Antarctic specially protected area. So Wilson brought the north south, he brought life to the desert, and it will remain there forever.
And the painting will always stay there forever.
Yeah.
That's really sweet.
And that's the Terra Nova expedition. And that's my rabbit hole for this week.
That was a lovely rabbit hole. That was a beautiful rabbit hole.
Thank you.
Very sad, but...
I'm obsessed with this story, and I'm obsessed with this play by Ted Talley.
Yeah. Is the play good?
It's wonderful.
Really?
It's wonderful. It's all about these 5 and like their final trudge to and from the South Pole.
And the play is called Terra Nova.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to read this.
Yeah, it's a really good play.
Well, thank you so much for this. This feels like a gift. This feels like a very special episode for some reason.
I cried on the pod.
You did. You did. It's your first time crying on the podcast.
It won't be the last, that's for sure. I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Connor.
And I told you this would be interesting.
Lindsay, thank you for that. And we'll be back next week with
a Connor rabbit hole.
With apparently a me rabbit hole.
Yeah. That's hopefully something sunny and fun.
I actually...
Like bunnies.
Oddly enough, I know what my rabbit hole is going to be next week.
What is it? Give me a hint. Tell me right now.
European.
Is it the Terra Nova expedition?
No, it is not a Terra Nova expedition.
Well, I guess we'll never know.
And the color green.
Is it about Ireland?
No, it's not about Ireland.
Then I don't want to know.
We'll
All
be
right.
back next week.
I'll see you in 2 minutes.
Absolutely.